I didn't wake up because of a noise. I woke up because my body decided it was time, like some hidden alarm had been installed in my ribs. My eyes opened into the dark, and for a few seconds I couldn't remember where I was. New apartment, new ceiling, new silence. Then the clock's red digits came into focus on the nightstand. 2:17 a.m. The room felt wrong in a way I didn't have words for yet. Not colder, not hotter, just heavier, as if the air had thickened and settled. I held my breath without meaning to. That's when I heard it. One step directly above my bed. Slow, heavy, controlled. Not a creak, not a pop of wood, not a pipe knocking. A footstep. It didn't scurry like an animal. It didn't scrape like something dragged. It landed with weight and intention, as if whoever made it knew exactly where my head was. There was a pause, long enough to count 2 heartbeats, then another step, same distance, same pressure. I lay still, staring at the concrete ceiling, my mind trying to build an explanation fast enough to beat the fear. Neighbor? No, I lived on the top floor. HVAC? It didn't sound like metal. The building settling? Concrete doesn't settle like that. The steps continued. 11 in one direction, then a pause, then 11 back. The rhythm was so precise, it felt rehearsed. 4 minutes later, the sound stopped, and the apartment returned to ordinary silence, leaving me with nothing but the clock and my own breathing, which sounded too loud now, too alive. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I told myself it was stress, move-in nerves. First weeks in a new place always mess with your sleep. You hear everything. You imagine patterns. I drank coffee and laughed at myself for being dramatic. That night, I fell asleep with a podcast playing low, the kind of voices that fill empty space. I woke at 2:17 a.m. anyway. The podcast had ended. The room felt heavy again. And above me, the steps began exactly the same. 11 forward, pause, 11 back, pause, repeat. After the third night, the sentence formed in my head like a bruise. Every night at 2:17 a.m., it walked above me. I hated how natural the words felt, as if they'd always been there, and I'd only just noticed. I live on the top floor, and I kept returning to that fact like it could save me. The building is concrete, old but sturdy, the kind of place that's survived decades of weather and negligence because it's too stubborn to fall apart. There's a flat roof above my unit. No attic, no crawlspace, no loft. The maintenance supervisor told me that during the lease walkthrough. Top floor's quiet, he'd said. No upstairs neighbors. That's why the sound made no sense. On the 4th day, I asked the landlord, casually, like I was asking about trash pickup, if there was any space above my ceiling, any maintenance corridor, any storage. He frowned at me like I'd asked if the building had a basement ocean. There's nothing up there but slab and roof membrane, he said. Why? I shrugged, pretended I'd heard something, and wondered if there were birds. He laughed. Concrete doesn't give birds a place to nest. I smiled, like that helped. That afternoon, I asked to see the roof access anyway. The supervisor walked me up the stairwell and unlocked the heavy metal door. The roof was exactly what I expected. Tar, gravel, a few ventilation units, an emptiness that made the city feel far away. The air smelled of dust and hot rubber. I stood above my apartment, stomped my foot, listened for the sound below. It didn't travel downward. It spread outward into open air. 6 inches reinforced, the supervisor said, like he was proud. Solid slab. 6 inches. I remember that detail because I started thinking about pressure, about what could make a slab feel like a drum at night. I went back downstairs, feeling foolish and slightly relieved. That night, at 2:17 a.m., the steps began again, directly above my bed, as if something had waited for me to confirm the ceiling was impossible. By the sixth night, I wasn't just listening, I was counting. I hated myself for it, but my mind couldn't stop. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was so consistent it pulled my thoughts into its orbit. 11 steps forward. Pause. 11 steps back. Pause. The pause was always the same length. 2 seconds. I timed it on my phone one night, finger hovering over the screen, eyes flicking between the clock and the ceiling. The total duration was always 4 minutes and 9 seconds. Not 4 minutes, not 5. 4 minutes and 9 seconds, like a routine set by someone who respected schedules. Random noise is easy to ignore. Routine is a knife. It cuts a groove. It makes you anticipate. By the 10th night, my body woke at 2:16 a.m. without help. I'd lie there in darkness, heart already beating faster, waiting for the first step, like a punishment I couldn't avoid. At 2:17 a.m. it would land, and my stomach would drop as if my insides recognized it before my brain did. I started noticing that the air changed at 2:16. The apartment would grow quieter, but not in the normal way. The refrigerator hum would feel distant. Street noise would dull. Even my own breathing sounded muffled, as if the room had been sealed. Then at 2:17, the first step would press into the ceiling, and the whole space would feel slightly compressed, like gravity had been turned up one notch. On the 12th night, I tried to fight it, not because I thought I could win, but because I needed to prove to myself I had some say in my own life. I stood on a chair at 2:16, held a broom, and stared up at the exact spot above my bed where the steps usually passed. When the first step landed at 2:17, I hit the ceiling hard with the broom. The impact echoed through my arms. The pacing stopped instantly. Silence. My heart hammered. I waited, broom still raised, muscles tense. Then, very slowly, one single step landed directly above the spot I'd struck, heavier than the others, as if something had moved to stand over me. No pacing, just presence. The air felt tighter. I lowered the broom. I backed away from the chair like it might tip over into something deeper than floor. After 30 seconds, the pacing resumed, but not the same. It began with a pause, as if considering. Then 11 steps forward, pause, 11 back. When it ended, the room didn't feel normal. It felt watched, not haunted, observed, like a person in a laboratory who has just moved a piece on the table and realized someone behind the glass took notes. I tried changing variables. I moved my bed to the other side of the room. The next night, at 2:17, the steps aligned above the new location. I slept on the couch. The steps moved above the couch. I dragged a mattress into the kitchen as a test. Ridiculous, but desperate. At 2:17, the steps began above the kitchen. It wasn't tied to a spot. It was tied to me. That made the apartment feel smaller, like the ceiling had a magnet and my skull was iron. I started leaving the lights on, thinking brightness would help. But light didn't change the sound. It only made the shadows look sharper, more suspicious. I tried sleeping with white noise loud enough to blur the edges of reality. I still woke at 2:17, and the steps cut through the noise like they were inside my bones. I began recording audio. It felt like the most rational response to an irrational problem. Gather evidence.
Prove it. Prove I'm not inventing it. I set my phone on the nightstand and hit record at midnight, then tried to sleep. At 2:17, the steps began, as always. In the morning, I listened. The footsteps were there, clear and unmistakable, each impact a blunt spike in the waveform. But between step 5 and 6, there was something else, so faint I hadn't noticed in real time. A soft inhale, then a soft exhale. It wasn't loud enough to be my own breathing, and the mic was on the nightstand. The breath sounded layered beneath the footsteps, like it came from inside the ceiling itself. I listened again with headphones. The inhale matched my rhythm. The exhale came half a second later, slightly delayed, as if echoing my lungs. It felt less like a ghost and more like a mimic, like something practicing the most basic part of being alive. I didn't sleep the next night. I stayed awake, watching the clock. At 2:17, I stared at the ceiling and forced myself to breathe shallowly, irregularly, hoping to disrupt the pattern. The steps continued unchanged. The breath on the recording later still matched my normal rhythm, not the panicked one I'd forced. That terrified me more than any footstep. It meant it wasn't listening to what I did on purpose. It was listening to what I did underneath, the part of me I couldn't control. By week 3, I was exhausted in a way that felt structural, like sleep wasn't just missing. It had been replaced by something else. I'd forget small things. I'd misplace keys. I'd walk into a room and stand there, unsure why I'd come. I started seeing the clock wrong. I'd glance at it and swear it said 2:71, like my brain was slipping digits around. One afternoon at work, my phone buzzed and I saw the time, 2:17 p.m. A shock ran through me like cold water. Nothing happened, of course, no footsteps, no pressure, but my body reacted like it expected them. My skin prickled. My stomach clenched. That was when I realized it wasn't just nights anymore. The time itself had become a trigger, a word that made my body flinch. Then the building began to join in. At least that's what it felt like. A wall clock I'd hung in the living room slipped off its nail at exactly 2:17 a.m. on the 21st night. It fell, shattered on the floor, the glass cracking across the face, splitting between the 2 and the 3. I stared at the broken clock until my eyes burned, feeling like it was mocking me. The next day, I replaced it with a cheap digital clock. It worked fine until 2:17 p.m., when it went blank for a second, then returned, the numbers flickering like they were uncertain. I changed the batteries. It kept time. But every time it hit 2:17, morning or afternoon, it would hesitate, the display dimming slightly, as if the number carried weight. I spoke to my downstairs neighbor because I couldn't carry it alone anymore. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I tried casual. "Hey, quick question," I said, in the hallway one evening. "Do you ever hear anything weird at night? Like, from the roof?" She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes shifting upward without thinking. "You're the one walking," she said, carefully. I laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Walking?" She nodded. "Back and forth, same time, it wakes me up." My mouth went dry. "What time?" I asked, already knowing. She frowned like she was trying to remember a number she didn't want to say. 2:17, she whispered. Hearing it from someone else was like having a knife pressed into my hand, and realizing I'd been holding it all along. The sound wasn't only above me. It was traveling downward, through my floor, through me. That night, I did something humiliating.
I wrapped soft cloth around my feet and taped it, not tightly, just enough to make walking difficult. I told myself it was a test. If the footsteps were mine, some kind of sleepwalking, I'd feel it. I'd wake. I'd stop. At 2:16 I lay awake, tape biting into my skin, sweating in my bed. At 2:17, the steps began above me anyway. 11 forward, 11 back. 4 minutes. Silence. I lay there trembling, half relieved, half sick with confusion. In the morning, the tape was torn, not neatly removed, torn. My feet were sore. When I checked the step counter on my phone, it showed 22 steps, between 2:17 and 2:22. Exactly. I didn't remember taking them. I didn't remember getting out of bed at all. But the count was there, like a witness that didn't care whether I agreed. I bought a small hallway camera, motion activated, cheap.
It felt like admitting defeat, but I needed to see what I was doing when my mind went blank. I placed it on a shelf facing the hallway and left it. For 3 nights, it recorded nothing. The pacing continued above my ceiling as always, but no motion below. I started to hope, dangerous hope, that the steps were separate from me, that my step counter was some glitch, that the tape had torn in my sleep because I'd twisted and kicked. On the 4th night, the camera caught it. At 2:17 a.m., the infrared footage showed my bedroom door opening. I stepped into the hallway barefoot. My eyes were open, not sleepy open, not squinting, open like someone awake. My face was blank. My posture was stiff. And then I walked. 11 steps forward, pause, 11 steps back, pause, repeat. The movement was perfect, unhuman in its consistency. At 2:21, I stopped, stood still, then tilted my head upward, slowly, toward the ceiling, like I was listening to something above. Then I turned and went back into my room, closed the door, and climbed into bed. At 2:22, the camera stopped recording. I watched the footage 3 times. I felt like I was watching someone wearing my skin. On the 4th viewing, I noticed something that made my stomach flip. At one point, mid-walk, my reflection appeared briefly in a dark window at the end of the hall. The reflection lagged, half a second behind my body. When I turned, the reflection turned a fraction late, then snapped into alignment as if correcting itself. After that, my sense of reality began to fray. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, like water face up. Nothing dramatic. But it felt face up. Nothing dramatic. But it felt like the apartment was being used at night, not by a burglar. No valuables missing, but by something that cared more about arrangement than theft. Like a person reorganizing a room to match a plan. I'd come home from work and feel the air wrong, like the smell had shifted. Not dirty, just different. The place would smell faintly, like outside, like rooftop tar and cold wind. I started locking my bedroom door at night. It didn't matter. I'd wake up in bed with the door unlocked and no memory of opening it. The camera would show my hand turning the lock from the inside with careful slowness, as if whoever controlled my fingers wanted to be sure it didn't make noise. At some point, I stopped thinking of it as footsteps. It became something else, a routine, a ritual. The apartment felt like a clock, and 2:17 was when the gears engaged. I stopped setting alarms. My body didn't need them. It woke at 2:16 like a dog waiting for a leash. I began to dread 2:15. I'd sit on my couch watching the minutes crawl closer, sweating, hearing my own pulse. Some nights I tried leaving the apartment before 2:17. sitting in my car in the parking lot to break the cycle. The first time I did, I left my phone inside recording audio. At 2:17, even from outside, I felt something like a pressure in my chest, a tightening that made me swallow hard. When I checked the audio the next morning, the pacing was there, exactly on time, even though I wasn't under the ceiling. That should have been relief, proof it wasn't in my head. Instead, it made the world feel worse. It meant it didn't need me present to begin. The schedule existed without my participation. The steps happened because it was time, not because I was listening. But then, on the same recording, I heard something else. After the pacing ended, there was a faint, soft sound like a small tap. One tap, then silence. It sounded like a knuckle on concrete, testing. On another night, I stayed at a friend's place across town. I didn't tell them why. I said I had trouble sleeping and didn't want to be alone. They joked about it, offered me a couch, turned on a movie. I pretended to relax.
At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the hallway camera at my apartment. Motion detected. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. I opened the live feed. The hallway was dark, empty, no one in frame, but the microphone picked up the pacing, faint, muffled, as if it was happening directly above the camera's position. 11 steps, pause, 11 back. Then, between the steps, the faint breath. And after the 4 minutes ended, the same soft tap. I stared at the empty hallway, shaking. The camera couldn't see what the microphone heard, and that made my brain try to fill the gap. I didn't want it to. I forced myself to look away. But the fear followed me like a shadow in daylight. The next morning, I broke into the roof access again, this time alone. I wanted to see if there were marks. I wanted something physical I could point at and say, there. That's where it walks. The roof looked normal at first. Flat tar, scattered gravel, vent pipes. I walked slowly above my unit, looking down at the surface like it might betray itself. Then I saw them. Not footprints, not shoe prints. Subtle compression lines in the tar, a faint path worn by repetition. 11 short scuffs in a straight line, then a turn, then 11 back. The marks were so light I could have missed them if I wasn't looking for a pattern. But there they were, repeated again and again, overlapping like a hallway carved into the roof by time. My mouth went dry. Wind tugged at my jacket. The city below sounded distant. I crouched and touched the tar. It was warm from the sun, soft enough to hold memory. I imagined something pacing there for years, not leaving visible tracks until it had done it enough times to create a groove. That thought slid under my skin and stayed. After the roof marks, the story changed in my head. Until then, I'd imagined something above me, because I heard it. Now I saw evidence of something that didn't need my hearing to exist.
The pacing wasn't just happening at night in my apartment. It was happening on the roof, in daylight, in the world. The pattern had been there long enough to press into tar, and I was only now noticing it. That made me feel late to something already in motion, like arriving at a train station after the train has been leaving for years. That night I tried not to listen. I stayed in bed with my eyes closed, hands pressed to my ears. At 2:17, the steps began as always. I forced myself not to count, not to follow, but my body counted anyway. I could feel the pattern in my muscles, the way you can feel a song you hate but have heard too many times. When it ended, I removed my hands from my ears. The apartment was silent. Then for the first time I heard a sound that wasn't above me. A soft step in the hallway outside my bedroom. On my floor. I froze. Another step. Slow. Measured. 11 steps forward. Pause. 11 steps back. It was the same pattern, but now it was inside my apartment, at my level, as if the ceiling wasn't needed. The steps stopped outside my bedroom door. One soft knock. Not loud, not angry. A polite knock. A knock that sounded like someone who knew I was inside and wanted me to open. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Another knock didn't come. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like an invitation left on a table. I didn't go to work the next day. I told my boss I was sick. It wasn't a lie, not really. I sat in my apartment with all the lights on, blinds open, trying to prove that day could keep me safe. I made lists of rational explanations and crossed them out one by one. Sleepwalking didn't explain roof marks. A neighbor didn't explain top floor. Pipes didn't explain footsteps with identical pauses. Hallucinations didn't explain my downstairs neighbor hearing it too. I felt like I was trapped between possibilities, each one worse than the last. If it was supernatural, I was helpless. If it was psychological, I was still helpless, because that meant my mind was breaking and taking my body with it. The days blurred, the nights sharpened. The more I feared 217, the more my life revolved around it. My schedule bent around a number. I began to hate the time itself. I'd see 217 on receipts, on a microwave timer, on a video timestamp, and my stomach would twist. Sometimes I'd glance at the clock and see 217 when it wasn't. My brain hallucinating the digits like a jump scare made of numbers. I started having dreams of corridors, endless hallways, a ceiling so low I had to crouch. In the dreams, I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, patient. And no matter how fast I ran, the rhythm stayed the same, as if it didn't need to chase, because it already knew where I'd be. I'd wake sweating, the clock glowing, 2:16, and I'd feel my heart pound, as if it had been summoned. One night I stayed awake in the living room with bright lights and a camera pointed at me, determined to catch the moment my body rose. At 2:16, the air thickened. At 2:17, the steps began above me. My eyes were open, I was awake, my hands were on my knees. I told myself, don't move, don't stand, don't give it a body. The footsteps continued. Then my vision blurred for a second. Not like fainting, more like a blink that lasted too long. When clarity returned, the clock read 2:22. My camera showed me standing in the hallway. 11 steps. Pause. 11 back. My face blank. My eyes open. At 2:21, I stopped, turned toward the camera, and smiled slightly. Not a happy smile. A minimal curve of the mouth, as if something inside me had learned that expression from watching people. Then I walked back into my room and lay down. I watched the footage in horror, feeling like I'd been robbed of time and replaced with performance. After that, the voice started. Not a voice from above. Not a whisper in the room. A thought that wasn't mine. It didn't arrive with sound.
It arrived with certainty, as if I'd always known it, and only now was remembering. We needed rhythm. The sentence surfaced while I was washing dishes, hands shaking. I froze, water running, and the words repeated. We needed rhythm. I looked around my kitchen as if I'd hear someone behind me. Nothing. Another sentence followed, calmer. You stabilized the boundary. My throat tightened. I tried to think my own thoughts louder, tried to drown it with mental noise, but it didn't fight. It waited. At night it grew clearer, like it was strongest when the schedule engaged. At 2:17, between the steps, I would feel it in my skull. Continue. Keep it steady. Don't break the corridor. I didn't understand what it meant, but my body did. My feet did. They ached with knowledge. Then came the worst realization. The pacing had never been about entering. It was about building. Repetition creates grooves. Rhythm creates structure. The roof marks weren't evidence of a trespasser. They were evidence of construction. Something had been making a corridor out of nothing by walking it into existence. 11 steps. Turn. 11 steps back. Again and again until Tar remembered. Until concrete remembered. Until my muscles remembered. The ceiling wasn't just above me. It was a surface, a boundary, and the pacing was a tool. I started to suspect that the footsteps were not on the roof at all, not truly. They were on the idea of the roof, the concept of above. The more I thought about it, the more the apartment felt like a lid pressed over something that wanted to open. And I was the one holding it shut by walking the pattern. The first time I saw it, not as a shape, not as a monster, but as a possibility, was in the hallway mirror at 2:21. I had set the camera again. I wanted to stay awake through it. I failed, as always, losing a few minutes like someone had cut a strip out of film. But the camera caught something new. At 2:21, when I paused and tilted my head upward, the mirror reflection behind me did not tilt at the same time. It lagged. Then it tilted farther than my real head, as if listening deeper. And in the mirror's upper corner, where ceiling met wall, the darkness seemed to bulge, not out into the room, but inward, like the mirror was showing depth the hallway didn't have. A corridor within the corridor. My stomach turned. I replayed it frame by frame until my eyes hurt. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see a hand. Only a sense of wrong alignment, the way a shadow can look, like it's not attached to the object that casts it. I tried to leave for good. I packed a bag, wrote an email to the landlord, told him I was breaking the lease for personal reasons, offered to pay fees. He replied with annoyance and policy language. I didn't care. I set a plan. I'd sleep one more night, then leave in the morning, when there was sunlight and traffic and noise. That night I slept with my shoes on, bag by the door. At 2:17, the footsteps started above me. My body rose, not in panic, in routine. I walked the hallway. 11 steps. Pause. 11 back. At 2:21, I stopped and looked at the door where my bag waited. Then I turned away and went back to bed. In the morning, my bag was unpacked. My shoes were neatly placed by the closet. My keys were back on the hook. It was as if someone had politely undone my decision. I felt something like despair then, a slow collapse in my chest. It didn't have to lock the door. It didn't have to threaten. It only had to keep me consistent. My downstairs neighbor knocked again a week later. She looked tired. "It stopped," she said. I blinked. "Stopped?" She nodded. "I don't hear it anymore, not at 2:17. For a second, relief flared. Then fear replaced it instantly. If she didn't hear it, where was it? That night, at 2:17, there were no footsteps above my ceiling. The apartment remained silent. No pressure. No heaviness. The air felt ordinary. My heart pounded anyway, because the absence felt like a trap. I lay awake until 2:21. Nothing. At 2:22, I started to relax, a dangerous loosening. Then I heard it. One step behind me in the bedroom, not on the floor, not from the hallway,
but in the space between my bed and the wall, where there wasn't room for anyone to stand. A step made of pressure, like a weight placed on the air. Then a pause, then another. The steps were inside the room now, but not on the floor. They were above the floor, like something walking on an invisible platform at shoulder height. I couldn't turn around. My muscles refused. The steps moved slowly toward the ceiling above my head. And then I understood with sudden clarity. It wasn't walking above me anymore because it didn't need above. It had created the corridor inside my perception. It had moved the boundary into me. After that night, the world tilted. I'd be at the grocery store and feel the air thicken at 2:16, even under fluorescent lights. I'd look up at the ceiling tiles and imagine them bowing inward. I'd hear a faint step in the hum of the refrigerator aisle. My life became a collection of places with ceilings, each one a potential stage. I started avoiding low rooms. I started sitting away from walls. I started scanning for access panels and vents like they were mouths. People at work asked if I was okay. I smiled too much. I said I wasn't sleeping well. It was true in a way that felt like understatement. I wasn't sleeping. I was performing absence. I'd wake to find myself standing in my hallway, mid-step, already in the pattern. It felt less like sleepwalking and more like being turned on for 4 minutes. Sometimes I'd come back to myself in the middle of the walk, awareness snapping in like a light, and I'd feel the urge to stop. Every time I tried, my muscles would tremble violently, like my body was fighting itself. The moment I completed the 11th step, the tremble would stop. Calm would flood me.
Relief so intense it felt chemical, like scratching an itch, like completing a circuit. That was the scariest part. My body rewarded the ritual. The voice grew more familiar, like a thought I'd had for years. It stopped sounding like an intruder and started sounding like logic. Keep it steady. Don't break the corridor. You are the surface now. The phrases arrived in my mind during the day, not as whispers, but as conclusions. I'd catch myself thinking in the plural. We should eat. We should rest. We should keep time. The first time I noticed, I felt cold all over. I tried writing my own name on paper, repeating it in my head as if it could anchor me. It didn't help. The voice didn't argue. It didn't need to. It was patient. It had all the time in the world, and it owned one specific minute every night. One evening, I went back to the roof at sunset. I don't know why. Maybe part of me still believed there was a way to end it by finding the source. The tar was cooling, turning stiff. I walked the length of the roof toward the marks above my unit. The groove was there, faint, but undeniable. The corridor pressed into the surface. I stood in it and felt ridiculous. Then the wind shifted, and for a moment I felt something like a presence behind me. Not a shape, not a figure, just a tension. The city noise below faded, as if someone had lowered the volume. My skin prickled, and then in my head the voice said something new. This was never your roof. My throat tightened. I looked around, expecting to see someone. The roof was empty. The corridor marks stretched beyond my unit, faintly, like the pattern had been made by more than one person over time, like it had traveled, like it had moved from tenant to tenant, building to building, as long as someone listened long enough to learn the rhythm. The last night before everything changed, I woke at 2:17, but not in my bed. I was standing in my hallway with my hand raised, mid-knock, facing my own bedroom door from the outside.
My heart stopped. My hand hovered inches from the wood. I could feel the tremor in my fingers like a held-back impulse. Behind me, in the darker part of the hallway, I felt something that wasn't light and wasn't shadow. The air seemed to bend. The voice was close, not audible, but intimate, as if it shared space with my thoughts. Continue. I tried to turn my head, tried to look behind me, but my neck refused. My feet moved. One step forward. Pause. Another step. The pattern began, and with it came that awful calm, the relief of obedience. 11 steps. Turn. 11 back. My body moved with perfect precision. I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the footsteps above my ceiling had been practice. It had taught me the distance. It had taught my muscles the turn. It had trained my body to become the corridor. It didn't need the ceiling anymore because it had built the above inside me. And then, as I reached the final step, the voice said the thing that shattered what little hope I'd been holding. You asked for proof. Now you are it. In the days that followed, the building felt stable. Too stable. The pacing above my ceiling never happened again. My downstairs neighbor looked rested. Whatever it was, it's gone, she said with cautious relief. I smiled and told her I was glad. The smile felt wrong on my face, like a mask worn by someone else. Because at 2:17 every night I still walked, not because I heard steps above me, because my body knew it was time. I would rise. I would step into the hallway. 11 forward. Pause. 11 back. And the air would settle, as if something above the world had been held in place by my movement. If I tried to resist, my muscles would lock and shake until I moved. If I skipped a step, panic would flood me like I'd stepped off a cliff. The only thing that stopped it was completion. The ritual wasn't punishment anymore. It was maintenance. I began to understand that this wasn't a haunting. It was a mechanism. A corridor being kept stable by repetition. A boundary needing a surface. The ceiling had been a convenient stage. The roof had been a convenient skin. But the true structure was the pattern itself. 11, pause. 11, pause. Worn into existence by attention, reinforced by fear, stabilized by a body that learned to keep time. Once you learn it, it doesn't need to teach you anymore. It only needs you to continue, and the longer you continue, the less you there is left to object. The voice becomes normal, the plural becomes natural, the minute becomes home. I tried to tell someone once, not the whole story, just a piece. I mentioned waking up at the same time every night to a coworker, expecting a joke, maybe sympathy. They laughed and said, "That's weird. I wake up at 2:17 too sometimes." My smile froze. "Really?" I asked too quickly. They shrugged. "Yeah, for like a week. It stopped, though." My stomach twisted. I watched their face. They seemed normal. Tired, but normal. I wanted to ask if they ever heard footsteps. I wanted to ask if they counted. I didn't. Because the voice in my head was calm and certain. They didn't learn the rhythm. And then softer, like a comfort. But you did. Now I don't set alarms. I don't need to. My body is precise. At 2:16 I wake. At 2:17 I stand. Sometimes I'm already standing before the clock changes, like my muscles anticipate it. Sometimes I catch myself humming during the day without realizing, and the hum matches the pacing's rhythm, the rise and fall of breath between steps. Sometimes I look at ceilings and feel affection. Sometimes I look at a long hallway and feel hungry. The apartment feels smaller each week, not because the walls move, but but because the corridor inside me feels larger. It feels like there is an above inside my skull, a vertical space where footsteps can exist even in daylight, even in silence. I've stopped checking the camera. I don't need to see myself anymore. I can feel the pattern from the inside. And that is the most terrifying part of all. The fear has become familiarity. If you ever move into a quiet top-floor apartment and you wake up at 2:17 a.m. to slow footsteps above your ceiling, don't do what I did. Don't count. Don't record. Don't test. Don't hit the ceiling to see if it responds. Don't move your bed to see if it follows. Don't give it your attention like a gift. Because attention is how it learns you. And once it learns you, it doesn't need above anymore. It will build the corridor in your body the way water builds a riverbed. Slow, patient, inevitable. It will teach your muscles the distance. It will teach your lungs the pauses. It will teach your mind to accept the time as law. And then one night, you'll wake up standing in your hallway with your hand raised mid-knock, and you'll realize the footsteps were never truly on the roof. They were on you. They were shaping you into a surface, a boundary, a lid that keeps something stable. Every night at 2:17 a.m., I still walk. 11 steps forward. Pause. 11 steps back. Pause. I walk because the corridor demands repetition. I walk because stopping feels like letting something open. I walk because the calm that comes after completion is the only peace I have left. I walk because the voice inside my thoughts is patient and certain, and it has become hard to tell where it ends. And I begin. Sometimes, in the moment after the final step, when the air settles and the apartment feels almost normal, I think I hear something very faint. Something that isn't footsteps. Something lower, deeper, like a structure shifting far above the roof, far beyond the ceiling, as if a door has stayed shut for one more night. And in that brief quiet, the thought arrives like a gentle reminder. Good. Keep it steady.
Then my body returns to bed, and I lie down, and I stare at the ceiling with my eyes open, waiting for morning, knowing that tomorrow night at 2:17 a.m., I will rise again whether I want to or not, because the pattern has been learned and the corridor has been built, and the thing that walked above me doesn't need the ceiling anymore. It only needs the time. It only needs the rhythm. It only needs me to continue.